Okay, welcome to an Evolving Man podcast. Today, I'm delighted to be speaking to Francis Michael Eliot. Francis is a five rhythms movement meditation teacher, a non-duality facilitator, and an active father to his two school-age sons. He also facilitates deep process men's work. Along with his partner, he's recently acquired the historic old ashram in Glastonbury, where they will soon be establishing a vibrant community hub, hosting all kinds of events. He's spent decades in the spiritual arena, has trained in various healing modalities, and is deeply insightful about his own life as an old Etonian. Welcome, Francis.
Thank you.
Really, really lovely to have you here. Thank you so much for agreeing to come on the podcast.
It's a pleasure.
So I like to kind of, some of the people who come on the podcast, I like to explain a little of the background. So Francis and I, we met about, I think it was 13 years ago, 2008. I was reflecting at a Five Rhythms dance in Hebden.
At mine, was I facilitating?
No, it was in Home Street.
Ah, okay. Can you
kind
remember
of-
who the teacher was?
It was you.
Oh, it was me. I was facilitating. Right.
Yeah. I came with Michelle, and that's kind of how we connected. So, over the years, we've spoken quite a bit about boarding school. And then we were speaking recently about coming on to the podcast and speaking a bit about Eton. So I'd love you to share a little bit just about your own boarding school experience, and how was it for you?
Gosh, it's so interesting talking about this. I think I've subconsciously, or maybe fully consciously, erased so much of my Eton experience. Even saying that, calling myself an old Etonian, there's some real. I don't think I've ever said that to anyone before. I'm an old Etonian, but I went to Eton, so I assume I am. I didn't collect a tie, an old Etonian tie, which is something that one is supposed to collect and parade for the rest of one's life. Anyway, my experiences at Eton, gosh. Is that what you were asking? What were,
or your boarding school journey. So did you go to a prep school beforehand?
So I did go to a prep school beforehand. I went to a boarding school, but just for about 2 years, Wellesley House in Kent. So I had, prior to that, I'd been at day school in London, in central London, West London, right up till that point. So I went to Eton having been to boarding school, but not having been to boarding school since 4 years old, 6 years old, like lots of the boarders who went to Eton. There was a sense of adventure when I went to Eton. We had our own rooms. We had our own village. Eton is basically a village. Wow. So you're at school in a absolutely beautiful, stunningly beautiful kind of village, really. It's obviously the school part of the village is sort of quite condensed in a way, but there was a real sense that of possibilities there, actually, that excitement and adventure. And I remember kind of, how can I break the rules? And, and so many opportunities, 1,400 boys, it created this kind of energy of this hum of that I hadn't, been ever really experienced before. It felt very different than my prep school. And of course there was cliques, and there was a way that one was sort of supposed to be. I never quite, I never felt like I really, I kind of wanted to be very accepted by everybody and would really kind of live my life in those days in a way that, you know, I would try my best to conform with a way, you know, and being in the world in a way, or being at Eton in a way that I could be accepted because of my own stuff. And but kind of paradoxically, I never felt like I fitted in at Eton. That's not to say my experiences were all bad. I had some great experiences there, but I didn't feel that I was an Etonian, you know, and perhaps that was related to the fact that I'd grown up in sort of bohemian West London and hadn't been around the kind of public school set. I'd been around a few public school people, I'm sure, but it hadn't been specifically a uniquely a public school set. You know, it'd been very, very mixed, you know, very artsy scene, and people from all kinds of backgrounds, you know, people were mega rich or totally skint, and that's still very much my life today, actually. And so I wasn't, you know, I didn't feel like I'd been like prepared by going to boarding school at a very young age, a typical boarding school that fed into Eton, somewhere like Summerfields. I don't know what age they start boarding there, but pretty young. And then you therefore go to Eton, and you'd be more in the scene, maybe, or you could say. My experiences there were varied, and but you know, something that really keeps coming to mind is the beauty of it. And you know, to go and play football, we kind of had to walk through this kind of ancient oak forest. And I mean, I'm not saying that I really was aware enough in those days to really appreciate it. But that left an impact. That left a really positive impact. There was some beautiful nature around. In those days, I was, well, maybe still, but I felt like I was pretty good at avoiding getting into trouble. And so I had a sort of rebellious spirit, but not one that attracted excess attention on myself. So I never got into too much trouble, but I did break the rules a fair bit, which I felt was a really important part of my my ability to stay, you know, cool with the whole Eton experience, you know. And but when I say I broke the rules, I guess I'm predominantly thinking about this place we called the Pit, I think, or maybe the Den. Okay. You know, every
sounds
school
interesting
has one. And it was out in nature, and it was a pit, and we used to, you know, drink bottles of Malibu, and you know, get really drunk and hang out, and kind of, you know, feel quite free and rebellious, and be in nature, you know, by the River Thames. You know, really beautiful. Yeah, and experimenting, exploring, you know, kind of. I remember like I mean, a lot of it was kind of, we were probably pretending as well, but I remember we discovered that someone had read somewhere that maybe like sprinkling some kind of leaves and then smoking them like on a tree or something, or maybe we were drying banana skins or something, and then, you know, be smoking them there, and that kind of thing, drinking and smoking, but I mean, not being dangerously rebellious, you know. So that was an important part of it. I wasn't particularly academic, but Eton really spoon feeds you to get to university without seemingly, you know, I really wasn't interested in any subjects, I have to say. I don't remember being remotely interested in any subject. So the fact that I was not remotely interested in any subjects, and I got good enough grades to go to a good university, says something about, I think, yeah, maybe the quality of the teaching or something. I don't know. I don't know really, but I don't remember really connecting with any particular academic subject. I was quite sporty. I was quite artistic, and there was amazing arts facilities and amazing sports facilities as well. But yeah, predominantly, I just didn't really feel in the scene, you know, which I think has boded well for afterwards, for after Eton.
Okay, thank you, Francis. So I've got a lot of questions here. I mean, the second question I've got is something we spoke about before, is this idea about class, prejudice, and what was it like to be an Etonian out in the world? I'd love you to speak about that a bit,
Okay,
please.
so let's get into the nitty gritty. Yeah, I was deeply ashamed of. I would hide the fact that I went to Eton for a long time, even after I left.
Mm-hmm.
Um, some people might say, maybe rightly, I don't know, you didn't know how lucky you were. Maybe I didn't. But I just always felt like I was part of a minority, and I didn't want to be. I wanted to be part of the majority. I didn't want to be picked on for going to Eton. It wasn't my choice. And actually, I tried to not go to Eton. I remember choosing not to go to Eton, but to follow in father's footsteps, I suppose. But
so your father went to
yeah,
Eton
my
as
dad
well.
went to Eton. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and his dad. And sorry, I lost my thread. What we? Oh yeah, the prejudice and. So yeah, I didn't feel like I could share that. I did go to London. I think when I got to 15, 16, me and my friends would go to London. We'd go to Chelsea football matches. We tried to kind of, we'd engage in real life, and which was a lot of fun. But one thing I remember and that comes to mind a lot is people, Etonians, constantly having the shit beaten out of them in Windsor.
Wow.
Windsor was a pretty violent place, as I remember it, in the 80s. And there were gangs of skinheads, walking around just picking on Etonians, and beating shit out of them. And I remember being quite shocked by this. There was someone in my house who I remember him absolutely being pummeled. And I remember there was this thing that the girl in the gang would take the last kick, when once he'd had the shit beaten out of him, completely on the ground, and then the girl would sort of deliver the last blow, and then the next thing we know, this guy's in the house just, absolutely just battered to pieces. There was a lot of this. There was a lot of prejudice, and you can understand why. It doesn't justify it, but in terms of the violence of the 80s and the class system, and that left a mark. And something obviously left a mark. I was deeply ashamed to say to anyone that I went to Eton. Even now, it's not, I'm not, I can't stand, I struggle to stand in being proud of it, and, why is that? It's an interesting question, because I'm definitely not the only one. I can tell you that as well. I'm definitely not the only one. And I almost feel like I didn't want to leave Eton, and I never had any sort of intention to only hang out with public school people or be in any kind of clique, which makes it very difficult. So it kind of, I think the response that one can get, maybe this is not everyone's experience, but it was my experience, but the response that one can get when being totally open with the fact that one went to Eton in central London, say, wherever you're hanging out, where you're not surrounded by Etonians or old Etonians, like, because of the response, and the projection, immediately you're being put in a box, and there is a sense of fascination, I guess, as well. But it's like, I didn't want that attention at all. I just wanted to be seen for who I was. Do you know what I mean? And but it does explain, I think, to some extent, why Eton people can really clique together.
Right.
You know, the Tory clique, whatever you want to call it, but the whatever clique it is, maybe specifically the Tory kind of clique, David Cameron, the Bojo, these types. And it kind of explains, you know, often I think, you know, it's no wonder that the clique exists. You know, we've got to recognize why and how maybe we're contributing to that, maybe. And maybe not, but we've got to allow that possibility, you know, that how much prejudice do we have about old Etonians, you know? Like, so that very prejudice maybe is creating the clique that we hate so much, you know? How much are we involved? So yeah, I reflect on this a lot. I reflected on this a lot in the last general election, when I witnessed some what I would definitely judge as classist, classist, prejudiced advertising by the Labour Party.
Yeah.
I actually voted Labour, but you know, I struggled with it this in the last election. I voted Labour for a while, but that's neither here nor there. But the you know, it was just like, guys, do you not see it? I remember reading, I can't remember word for word what it said, but it was something of, you know, it was sort of alluding to toffs and another old Etonian. I saw it as an advertisement by the Labour Party on the tube in London.
Right.
You know, it's just like, Jesus, man, you know, this ain't gonna work. It just isn't, you know, it's not gonna work. And you know, the world is healed through understanding and compassion, and so many friends, you know, voted Labour. So, you know, like, I've had to call people on it, and I've had one or two people say, thank you so much. I didn't realize how prejudiced, I didn't realize I was prejudiced, you know. And I do think that there's some exploration as a culture that we maybe need to do there about what are the hidden prejudices. We know what the more obvious prejudices are, but what about the hidden prejudices? It's still okay for a newspaper to use the word toff, you know?
Yeah.
Why is that okay? You know, it's just like, hang on a minute, where, you know, well, maybe because they're all a bunch of, well, maybe they are, maybe they're not, but how is that, how are you in that attitude, if you're saying that, contributing to the very problem that you're complaining about? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So yeah, there's this big that's a big topic.
So you mentioned about compassion and understanding. So how would say that look for us as a, you know, the general public approaching Boris Johnson and the Conservative government, rather than the hatred and this disdain? How would that look?
Well, I mean, predominantly it's the inner work we have to do, right? I mean, you know, we're relatively, each one of us on an individual level anyway, is relatively powerless to make the kind of changes that we, I don't know, no, maybe that's not a right thing to say, but you know, compassion comes from the inside. It's like, we can't fake compassion. You know, if we can't say, well, as a culture, we need to just stop moaning about the Conservative government, understand that they're all just a bunch of screwed up, you know, understand that, you know, that they've all got trauma or whatever, and forgive them. And I'm not talking about that, because that's, you know, the real work is to for each individual one of us to explore how we you know, in the subtlest of ways contribute to the situations that we complain about and that we hate. You know, there's so much blame happening, and I do it too. I'm not saying I don't blame. I'm blaming all the time. So you know, this is all a process. You know, there's not even an end point, but and to a certain extent, it's a spiritual process. But it doesn't even have to be a spiritual process; it can be a therapeutic process. But you know, unless it's got unless it's got compassion at its root, unless it's got, you know, like why, you know, one always has to say, well, why, you know, we always have to ask, inquire, you know, like what the bigger questions, like, especially if we're not happy, you know, especially if there's an area in life, which probably there is for just about everyone, where we're not happy, we have to ask, well, the bigger questions of you know, I feel like I'm not happy because my circumstances are not as I would like them to be, whether that circumstance is my own personal body and health, and or out in the world, you know, my financial poverty, whatever it is, you know. You know, so how you know, if these circumstances around us are created because of conditions, you know. So how can I really honestly change those conditions from the inside so that it's really true, you know? Well, that's done through understanding what has led people to create the very conditions that we don't like. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, definitely. I remember a talk years ago, someone saying about the Dalai Lama, someone saying, because I used to get criticized being Buddhist, of someone in my family said to me, well, what do the Buddhists ever do for the world? And I'm like, ow. And then I heard the Dalai Lama say, and I was a
there
Buddhist.
Is no world.
and I heard the Dalai Lama say, well, you know, how do we find world peace? The question to him was, how do we find world peace? And he says, well, what's the world made up of? You know, countries. What are the countries made up of? Communities. And what are the communities? Families. And then what's a family? Individuals. So we begin world peace by ourselves. And I think that's really empowering. So thank you. That feels really empowering, that there is something we can do, you know, to soften that. Because
and there's also something, sorry to interrupt, but there's something really essential here about understanding that we are in a line of kind of infinite generations. You know, like, so we're just doing our bit in our lifetime, and we are not going to see, I mean, we're seeing some pretty big change now in the world for sure, but we mustn't forget this enormous line behind us and in front of us. You know, forget our ideas about, I'm not talking about our ideas about, well, there's not going to be any humans in 20 years, 30 years, 40 years. I mean, you hear so many different things, don't you? But I'm not talking about that, you know, lay that idea aside, you know, for now, and just consider that, that we are in this sort of infinite line in a way, and that we can only do a certain amount, a limited amount, just to one human being, but that we need to feel okay with doing our best and doing our bit, and you know, hopefully leaving at least the world in our immediate vicinity in a better condition, in a more healthy condition than it was before us. You know, and then those healthy conditions, if everybody were to do that, the healthy conditions would all kind of, join together.
Yeah.
And it's a
Yeah.
nice kind of image, isn't it? I mean,
yeah, it's beautiful.
but there's this aspect of longevity of that. The ego really thinks it's me here now, and I'm the only one. That it's do they call it the God complex or something? But it's like we forget that we are actually we forget humility. Such an absence of humility. That's why I really like the Buddhists. They're really, there's not all of them, but a lot of them that really, I followed Thich Nhat Hanh for a while and went on a couple of retreats with him, and such humility.
Yeah.
Such humility. It's like none of this getting drunk on one's ego, getting drunk on the idea that I can make the huge change or whatever. It's like just tend to your own garden. It's like, yeah, okay, there are some individuals who can make huge big changes, but most of them who are saying that, most of the ones who make the big changes aren't the ones who are going to really voice it really loudly. They're the ones who are just going to come up through through doing the personal work, and then
yeah, great. I really like the sounds. It feels very empowering, that. So thank you, Francis. So I've got quite a lot of questions. I feel you've answered quite a lot of them. Talked about the education. You felt that was good.
Well, I from an academic point of view, it was good. Yeah. But I think it's utterly out of date. And I almost said inhumane. I mean, about what is considered in those circles, as in those sort of Eton circles, public school circles, as a good education. Like I didn't learn anything useful. I didn't learn to breathe properly. That took years, and I'm still pretty crap at it. I mean, like, if I'd have suggested that in Eton, people would have scoffed. But actually, like, how important is that for our health, right? For our body to move properly. And I didn't learn to work a garden, to grow my own food. Is basic, like basic importance for a human being. Absolutely basic. And I didn't learn even to sew a button on a shirt. The simplest, most obvious things were really missed, in the supposedly best education that money could buy. I didn't learn anything really about emotional intelligence, being able to translate one's emotions into words, to sort of decouple the mess that emotions can be in, which can be really helped by using models like the core emotions stuff I learned in psychotherapy. And I didn't learn any of that. That's pretty important to be able to navigate one's emotions in life. I mean, look at what the result is in the world when people aren't able to navigate anger. So a good education, I wouldn't call it that actually at all. I'd call it a very good academic education with excellent facilities, amazing facilities, which I was deeply grateful for, in a beautiful environment, which I was deeply grateful for.
Sounds, yeah, very similar to my boarding school. We had the academic brilliance and the sporting, but yeah, the emotional. I said in a podcast before, this idea of the archetypes, the lover quadrant of feeling, emotion. It's like we're just not educated at all in that aspect, and it sounds like it was similar there. So I
Or
have a
anything remotely spiritual. I mean, I think that, I don't know
mm,
what's happening now with schools. Maybe meditation is moving in, I think, to a certain
yeah.
degree, but just the importance of, like, well, there's two things. One is just that what seems so obvious if you think about it. How important would it be to allow the mind to relax and become aware of the moving body,
Mm,
thus, bringing just some energy down into the body. And what, it's very simple. We don't have to get all esoteric about it.
mm,
It's very
mm,
simple meditation that we all know now that really helps with life. And I'm sure people knew then when I was at school, and I'm sure meditation hasn't really entered into school, anywhere near into schools anywhere near as much as it could. Um, and there was another aspect, which is just the big questions, the big spiritual philosophical questions, like
mm,
like like what is the universe made of, or
mm,
um like, who are we really?
mm,
you know
mm, mm, mm,
well, are we really just a name? Are we, we're clearly not an age, because that's always changing. Maybe we're a mixture of biology and are we just this whole mixture of everything? Well, which bit? And exploring, okay, these are interesting. Where could we go with this?
So you
It's
didn't feel you
it's
had
quite an
that.
essential exploration, I think, isn't it? Like these big questions,
Mm,
like who are we? Who am
mm,
I? I mean, it's just like miss the biggest question of all.
yeah. So you didn't feel you had that at your school. They didn't have those questions or that
Oh, no,
spiritual.
no,
No.
I didn't. Not in my experience.
Yeah, interesting. Because it's been in the press recently, the last few months, about Eton and their debates and them not allowing certain debates to go on. So it sounds like there was that at your school as well, that although debating was there, it was certain subjects.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I wasn't really. I somehow just didn't get taken up by the Eton scene.
Mm,
I think there was debating clubs, debating societies that went on, and I just kind of feel like they probably just took a look at me at Eton and went, "No, we can't really. We he's not really one of us." I'm not saying that they looked at me and went, "No, we can't uh, condition him in a way that we want to condition." I know that people think that people think that this big sort of, that's more the conspiracy theory kind of side of, you know, perspective, where there's, it's all part of this cult that are just trying to indoctrinate people. And I didn't feel that
mm,
was going on. There was, but I just think there was a scene that there was a structure, a kind of a way of operating, and it's very based on tradition and conservatism. And I'm just not, my personality type is not conservative remotely. I'm much
yeah.
more kind of free thinking and
Mm,
open-minded.
mm,
Um, but there's nothing wrong. Some people are wired in a more conservative, into more tradition,
mm,
um, and that's very much what Eton is holding, that kind of personality type. So I think they kind of maybe, I just didn't fit in to the
mm,
to the to the type. So I didn't really know what was going on. I had a feeling that maybe there was some pretty healthy stuff actually going on, and I think there were debates going on, and maybe there was spiritual debates. I have no idea, but I didn't experience them.
okay. Thank you. That's really good to know. So, um, so one of the questions which I find fascinating is, so a lot of these came from the boarding school forum I'm part of, and it says boarding school survivors, so those who went to boarding school, have lived a life have lived a life very detached from what most people call real life. Is it possible for the leaders of today, coming from this damaged background, to even understand the society and people they stand for? Should they be required to undergo mental health therapeutic screening as the clergy are required to prior to taking up public office?
I mean, do we understand them? You know, yeah, we
Mhm.
can say, do they understand? You know, like I don't consider myself working class, but let's say I'm a working class person debating this, contemplating this issue, and saying, well, they don't understand us. Well, no, they probably don't. But do we understand them?
Well, yeah.
Like, it goes both ways, and I'm not saying that it's anyone's fault. I'm just saying this is the way the world works. Like,
Yeah.
I don't think they do understand people.
No.
No. Um, yeah, just go back to the first bit that you read to me.
Yeah, so they're saying they've lived a very detached life from what most people call real life. Is it possible for the leaders of today, coming from this background, to even understand the society and people they stand for?
I also think it is. I mean, I'm not sure how much of it is a boarding school thing. You know, it's
Mm-hmm.
boarding school survivors. I mean, I'm sure, I don't know, but I'm sure there are lots of people who came out of boarding school, you know, and are very appreciative, you know, just like coming out of any school, appreciative of some aspects, not appreciative of others. And I certainly don't think it's a given that anyone who went to boarding school doesn't understand how people live. But I don't think it's, yeah, I mean, it's a tricky one, isn't it? There's so many different aspects to it. On another level, of course, somebody who has been never had any financial issues, has had everything given to them that they want, that they you know, could possibly want in a way, and then goes to school, you know, good education, and of course they're not going to really understand on an embodied level what it's like to be homeless. Of course they're not going to. And I don't think any like psychological test or would change that, you know, would I don't think that would be of any use. I don't think so. I don't think that would address the core issue at hand here, which is a much bigger issue of just absence of understanding the other, you know. And I mentioned Thich Nhat Hanh earlier, and I remember being really quite young, and well, I don't know, maybe really quite young, maybe 20, and or maybe a little older, but hearing about him and how he, the way I heard the story anyway, was that in the Vietnam War, he was considered a leader, or a Buddhist leader, of a monastic community anyway. And they were quite relatively well known, I think, in Vietnam. And in the Vietnam War, he was asked, well, basically what he would say in the Vietnam War was that people would say, why aren't you getting involved in fighting the oppressor? Why are you just promoting sitting? He wasn't actually, he did end up promoting, you know, they were, his community were active. They were actually humanitarians really, but he said that we have to sit in meditation and become the oppressor. We become both sides. We sit and we become the North Vietnamese, and we sit and we become the South Vietnamese. We have to feel our way. Like we have to get over our freaking, a conditioned way that we've been taught to hate this, but because of the, and we have to actually, through compassion, we have to distance ourselves from the emotion. So hence the meditation cushion, and imagine ourselves just to be, and we have compassion. Oh yeah, it becomes pretty bloody obvious. If I'd have had exactly the same conditions as that person, yeah, I would be attacking that person. So it's compassion. It's and that it's very inspiring, to actually, recognize. I've lost my thread actually. What was I answering?
So we're talking about, this having to undergo this therapeutic screening, and about, is it leaders understanding
So
understanding
the
their
bottom
community?
line is we have to understand them. We can't really in life complain about people not understanding us. Like probably if we're doing that, we don't understand them. So we have to do the inner work, become Bojo, become David Cameron or whatever. Feel like what, and then we can act in the world and be an activist from an understanding of the conditions that led that person to be in that way. Do you know what I'm saying? And and that's not going on quite clearly in government. That's and it'd be wonderful if it was. I mean, that would be an amazing government, to actually just imagine that if we had a government and they actually went into silence. It's like I heard someone say recently that they knew someone who spent a fair amount of time in the White House. Yeah. And they asked that person, they said, in the White House, like, I've got this question, is there any silence? Is there any kind of area in the White House, like that's known about, that's sort of honored in some way, even if it's just a quiet kind of corner, or is there, any silence? The guy just went, nothing.
Wow.
And it's like, it's kind of the same in politics, isn't it? It's just trying to defend yourself from attack, and then and it's such a high stress environment. And so that's another of the many reasons why we have a government who we feel do not listen, aren't in touch with and I do think there is an aspect of, I mean, my part in it as an old Etonian, who did witness the prejudice that Etonians would get. I'm not remotely surprised that the Tory clique is this sort of thick-skinned, way of being. Partly that is the sort of traditional way through Eton. We're not taught about our emotions, but the clique itself, the unhealthy clique itself, and I did see those unhealthy cliques at Eton. It's like we have to ask ourselves, what's created this clique?
Yeah. I'm just wondering if, because it almost sounds like, so if the Tory clique, if that's what they were like at school, that's what they're like now. So all of their friends, they're only really comfortable, they only really understand, it sounds like, those who went to school with them. on one level. So they make friends with, or they're kind of in business with other people who are in similar fields. So it's almost on one level, could they really understand other people if, because of their boarding school upbringing, they only really understand themselves. They only feel comfortable within themselves. But
yeah, I think that is the case. And I liked Jeremy Corbyn, but and I'm not interested really in politics. I don't know very much about politics, so I really hope I don't trigger anyone here. But I was triggered by just, at first I just really, really liked him, and then I just felt like I actually got into a conversation with the Labour candidate in this constituency here about this subject. We had a really interesting discussion, and I really felt I felt like he was prejudiced. He was like, I just felt this sense that the Etonian side of me wasn't being remotely understood in any way, but just wanted to be eradicated because it was a minority kind of thing. Like that was the sense I got. Let me just open the window. It's warm in here. Yeah. It's very.
Fascinating.
So, I could go into more detail about that. But
yeah. Well, we've got other questions, but thank you so much. We've been going probably just under 50 minutes, so it's amazing how time goes quickly.
Talk a lot.
So I guess one of the other questions, what have I got? So you've kind of spoken about that. You've spoken about all the best. Yes, you've spoken that. So I guess, would you say that Boris Johnson was a typical product of Eton?
I don't know. I hung out with all the kind of misfits.
Okay.
And there was a lot of them. There was quite a lot. It came from old stock, bit fuddy-duddy sort of families, and bit sort of dusty around the edges, and maybe quite bohemian and creative and artistic anyway. And there was quite a lot of artists came out of Eton, and there was a whole mixture of people really. So I wouldn't say he was I would say he was a typical product of a particular aspect of Eton that was into control and power.
Okay.
But by no means all of them were. I wasn't remotely interested in control or power, I don't think. And nor were my friends. We were just interested in, I don't know, we were more, I think it's a lot of it comes down to personality types, actually, I think.
Yeah. Interesting. Thank you. Control or power. Okay, yeah. So coming back to the question, you're answering before, did you feel there was discrimination by staff or boys on the basis of race, sexual orientation, wealth, or class while you were there?
So I've got a good story here. I went to Eton, having been brought up in Ladbroke Grove, London, and as a kid, I remember when I went to Eton, I was 13. That's when you start there, and I was really into the Jam, that band.
Okay.
And we had our own room. We could decorate it how we wanted, and I had a poster of the Jam on my wall. And after a few days or a few weeks, there was this kind of like rumor going around. Like, well, it wasn't a rumor; it was right, but people were sort of whispering and going, "He's a pleb." It's so funny because I actually, it's like I come from aristocracy. Not that really means much to me, but you know, it was like, he's a pleb. And I was like, wow, this is, you know, and I had kind of, I was started getting a bit teased, and then I realized, I don't think anyone who was spreading these rumors knew who the Jam were, even though they were huge. But it was because they were, all of them, Paul Weller and Bruce Foxton, whoever the other third one was, were wearing white socks. And like the trend, the sort of, you know, fashion was quite short, tight, black trousers and white socks. And it was like white. So I'd never heard of this thing that if you wear white socks, you're a pleb. Like, you know, this went around, and so you know, this must have come from pre-Eton. You know, this sort of vibe, this weird classist sort of division. It was all new to me. You know, I really wasn't. You know, I was just like baffled by this, and yeah. So it didn't really go that much further because I wanted to be a sort of, you know, I sort of sometimes put on a bit of a like voice like this, you know, just to try and desperately be accepted, you know. I mean, luckily I didn't have a super posh voice, but you know, this idea that I was able to pleb and like, wow, it's just bonkers. So I think there was one or two black people at Eton when I was there, maybe one or two. I didn't know them. I don't know if, you know, I'm sure there were all kinds of comments made. I mean, it was a school with 1,400 boys, and believe it or not, one girl when I was there, one of the housemaster's daughter. Heavens above, 1,400 boarding school, you know, boys between the age of 13 to 18. You can imagine the amount of testosterone and you know there, and the objectification of women that would come from the fact that there was no women around. So who were women? Who were these creatures? You know, just like, well, you know, it's just like there were these, you know, if we were lucky, we might be in the scene that would meet some of the girls from the local posh girls' school, not that local, quite far away, but they would go to the graveyard in Windsor, you know, and get drunk, and some people would snog on the graves. And I think I told people that I went there. I never did, like, because I wasn't cool enough. But yeah, you know, so I the only prejudice I experienced in the school was, you know, this weird thing with pleb, but I think I then probably took my poster down. I don't know. And then of course the prejudice from the local towns, you know, Windsor and Slough, we just felt like we'd have cars driving through and shouting abuse at us, and you know,
Interesting. That's useful to hear that side, because often we don't hear that. We don't hear what it was actually like in the 70s, 80s, 90s, the abuse that the Etonians got. The old Etonians got.
Yeah. I mean, look, any institution in those days with 1,400 kids, boys, and a whole load of teachers who lived there, many of whom had been to Oxford or Cambridge, or, you know, and had gone, like my housemaster had, I think, been to Cambridge or maybe Oxford, and then had gone straight into teaching at Eton. So he'd been to boarding school himself, straight into another kind of institution, straight into Eton. I mean, they hadn't lived in the world. You know, there was not many people who had really lived out in the world. And so put all the teachers together with a whole bunch of boys and all the sexual energy that comes with, you know, adolescence, and you know, you're gonna get some energies around that. Yeah, you're gonna get an energy of sort of abuse, you know. It's kind of inevitable, I think, in those days. You know, I'm pray not now, because thankfully it's been so high, you know, it's been really highlighted. It's kind of, there's been a lot of revelation, not just of course Eton, but all over the place. But and you know, so I wouldn't say it's I don't know if it was a uniquely Etonian thing. Also, there was this I knew, well, he was in the year above me. I sort of vaguely knew him, but he showed up after half term or something with this really radical, cool, trendy haircut. Yeah, it had a name for it. It was like cool at the time, you know, in London. And I thought it did look pretty cool. I think Morrissey influence. Anyway, he was actually sent home. He was what we call rusticated. You know, he wasn't expelled, but yeah. And he went to the Sun newspaper and sold his story. Made a whole load of money. And after that, it became much harder to get rusticated from Eton because the school was scared. I think the school was scared that people would sell their story to the newspapers, and of course, the headmaster, the trustees, I guess, didn't want Eton to get this reputation of having lots of kids who were being expelled and rusticated.
Yeah. Wow. Interesting.
So,
interesting.
Yeah. I can't remember
So,
why I on that ditty, but
no, that's cool. I mean, what about, you know, we talk about discrimination. What about fagging? You know, so for those who are listening who don't know, fagging was basically something which happened a lot up till the 60s, 70s in the UK and many boarding schools, where the older boys would get the younger boys to do duties like cleaning shoes, making them toast, making them cups of teas. I mean, 100 years ago, it was extreme. They were basically a slave. Was there still fagging while you were there?
I think it stopped the year before I went, actually.
Really?
As did, what do you call it? Corporal punishment.
Okay,
training.
wow.
Yeah, it stopped the year before. The year before I went. I think when I went, the year before I went, I think there was a big scandal when the story went that the cleaner of one of the rooms that the prefects could go into at school asked the headmaster for some ashtrays. Story went, and the headmaster went, "Oh, what's going on in there then?" And then he suddenly uncovered that for decades it had been a smoking room by the boys. So, you know, what the story suggests, you know, pointing to, which I saw, was that I think before I went there, there was probably perhaps generations where the students really ran the school to a certain extent, but that really changed. And I think there would have been good aspects of that, the boys running the school, and bad aspects of that. And I think fagging was part of that. So, you know, of course, I mean, obviously there's going to be some people taking advantage of their ability to control, and if they're given permission to have a kind of slave, you know, they're going to treat them like shit, probably. Sometimes, other times not. But I don't know much about it, but it sounds like a very quite an outdated way of running a school.
Yeah. I was speaking to another friend who went to a well-known Catholic boarding school, and he was saying that the priest just got the boys to run the school. They taught and they just left it, and the abuse was so rife, and the bullying and the fagging. They kind of eventually stepped in and they said, okay, we need to get adults into these boarding houses.
I'm sure there's, you know, over generations there's been appalling abuse at Eton, I'm sure, but I can't say that categorically because I wasn't witness to it. I had a headmaster who, bless him, he was pretty nasty. We would oh, bless him, Diesel, but we would have to have our lights off at a certain time at night. We all had single rooms, and he had a drawing of the house from the perspective of being outside, where he could see all the windows, at least of one side of the house. So all the rooms that had windows, and I think that was a lot. That was like half of the building, and maybe he had a drawing for the other half or whatever. But basically, he would be able to. What I'm saying is, he'd be able to go outside after lights out time and see who had their lights on by seeing cracks of light that would come in, and then he'd come into the room. He'd go back into the house, come into the room. And he had this habit of holding your hand against the hot light bulb to burn your hand, you know?
Wow.
Yeah, this kind of stuff happened without a doubt, and there was, he was this desperate little man who was just needed to control everything. And of course, the more he tried to control us, the more we just like went, fuck you, And I remember we had this house revolt. We all got together and we were demanding, to be treated better. And it was quite powerful, actually. It was really just like standing up for ourselves. And, there was a committee and they went to meet him, and, like how we had demands, and it was quite organized. We called it the revolt. And, and then we just have to torment him as well. He had the initials MTP, and MTP at the time, there was a really well-loved comic called 2000 AD. Yeah, that had this character Mutie the pig. He was a mutant, Mutie the pig, MTP. So we called him Mutie. Our housemaster was called Mutie, and and so everyone referred to him as Mutie, which is pretty insulting, and blimey, he was, but he was nasty, and I remember becoming friends with someone in a year below me, a couple of years below me, just friends, like totally innocent, just a freaking friend. Like my kids have got friends who aren't necessarily their age, a couple of years above, a couple of years below. And he asked me to stop being friends with him. He didn't think it was appropriate, I mean, what is that about? I'll tell you something else, another story. I was, I think maybe once in your Eton career, you had dinner or lunch with the headmaster.
Okay.
I think it was the headmaster. I don't even remember the actual lunch dinner, but what I do remember was we would be told that by our housemaster. And my housemaster, when he announced to me that, I was to go there on this particular date, he said, what I'd say to you is write on a note of paper, things that you could talk about, interesting things you talk about, and just put it in your pocket. And when you're in there, you just have a little look, and so you can talk about things. It's like, where's the trust in just I mean,
exactly.
That's I mean, it's incredible, no?
It is, yeah, and it just brings up
education that we were given, bonkers. But this is the thing, that these are these teachers. This is the institution of Eton. These teachers are just following their conditioning of never having really been in the world, and understanding the value of intuition or anything like that.
So it kind of really sounds like it was a very controlling environment on one level, that you can't speak to this person.
But I had a bunch of friends in a house who had a housemaster who was just this doddering kind of just like let it all happen, man. There were parties in there all the time. I was so jealous. I so wanted to be in that house. It was higgledy-piggledy. There was rooms, or our house was just this regimented, like it was like a prison. It was just like 3 corridors above each other, and he knew exactly, so he could walk down the corridor. My friend's house, it was just rooms all over the place, and up in attics, and it was all much more kind of old school, and just like, and they just had a freaking holiday, man. My friends, as far as I could see, for 5 years. So it all went down, maybe.
Yeah. Interesting.
But he, we did play brilliant tricks on our housemaster. Like there was, we got somebody, a friend had a friend who was a girl at a different school, a girls' school, who one night called up, pretended to be the headmistress of this girls' school, called up our housemaster to say that a boy claiming to be in his house has just been found in bed with a girl at her school, and could he please come and collect this boy immediately? And he did, and there was no one there, so we play these brilliant tricks on it.
Oh dear. Oh, thank you. So I mean, I guess the question I have there, you mentioned about prison. I was reading Peter Levine's book. What was it? I think it's the Waking the Tiger. And he talks there about, if we've been hit as a child, then if we've been traumatized as a child, then when we get to an adult, we're more likely to inflict that trauma on others. And as you say about prison, I'm wondering about the boarding school. If we were imprisoned as children, will we then as adult want to imprison and control others? And I'm just wondering if, our leaders of today, there's so much control, so many rules, so many, and I'm wondering, because I don't know what Eton was like, but it sounds like it was in your house, but maybe not in others. So what do you feel about that?
Well, I'm not sure about that. I mean, it can obviously go both ways. If we felt like we had a very imprisoned childhood, maybe we want to, in my case, I'm very, pretty liberal with my kids, and really, Eton's the last place I would send them, really. Well, not the last place I would send them, but I'm not sending them I haven't sent them to boarding school, no chance. Okay. Yeah, I'm not sure about that. I really don't know.
Okay, good. Yeah, it's something which I'm kind of percolating over. So, okay, thank you.
But Thatcher didn't go to boarding school, did she? And she was very controlling. And there's a lot of people who didn't go to boarding school who have been in government who are very controlling. I think it goes way deeper than boarding school. Maybe boarding school is syndrome of this element of control. It's we have to trace it back really and see, where did this boarding school tradition come from? Where did it start? And is it still relevant to have them?
Yeah.
Maybe it isn't. But yeah, but not everyone would agree with that. What about the people who have miserable childhoods at home? And should we be free to be able to send our children to boarding school if we want? And maybe they had a great maybe it's the best thing for them. We can't make too strong assumptions.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think someone was saying, whether it was in a recent podcast, someone saying that, those who, I think it was someone possibly in social services saying that often children who are being taken away from homes, the parents really want them to stay at home. Whereas the boarding school tradition, the privilege, it's like they're wanting the children to go. And it's almost like that dichotomy of,
Say again. Oh, right. Yeah. I see. Yeah.
So they're kind of trying to take the children off them, put them into foster care. And I think in that instance, they say that only should you take a child off them if their life depends on it. And so I find that kind of a fascinating idea around boarding school, that we see it as a privilege. And I love what Joy Chevron and Nick Duffel and other people are talking about, this idea that we're seen as a privilege, but actually there's side effects of it. So we spoke a little bit before, kind of last week, the idea of what have you found really helped you? You mentioned about embodiment. What's helped you to resolve, come more into your heart, resolve, become more embodied? And what would you say for others?
What's helped me? It's very difficult to boil it down to a few words. Courage, probably the biggest one. Courage to just, what's helped me? At the end of one's Eton career, there's this very lovely, beautiful tradition where you send people, however many you want, to whoever you want, these things called levers. And a lever is a bit of card that you cut out, and you put a photograph of yourself and you write a little message
Yeah.
to that person. And I remember someone in my house who I'd never had a conversation with, I don't think. He was in the year above me. When he left, he sent me a lever, and I'll never forget it. It said, it takes a, I can't remember exactly. It said something like, it takes a lot of courage to not be stereotyped in a year such as yours. Because there was a vibe in my year in my house at Eton. It was very much a clique. Yeah. And I guess so on a personal level, I think the courage to not be stereotyped, to keep seeking one's own, to keep having the courage to, discern like what's one's own true calling in life, rather than what does society want me, or what does my Etonian condition want me to do. It's like sometimes I looked at, soon after I left Eton, and the people I knew there were starting to get jobs, and I was just like, why do you want to go and work in a freaking office when you don't have to financially, when you can afford not to? I was just like, thank God I can afford not to go and get some 9-to-5 job. Thank God. And I guess maybe it took courage for me to follow that when, the world would possibly judge me as being a trustafarian, I always quite like that term, trustafarian. So I didn't mind, sometimes being called that. But I was like, wouldn't you like to be a trustafarian? Who wouldn't, man? And it comes with its own challenges as well, of course, because, where's your drive for really going somewhere in life where, if it's not survival, if it's not like to make money, let's hope it's not to get recognition. Where's the drive in life if you have all your needs are taken care of? So where's that going to get you? Well, it's probably going to make you pretty unhappy, because as far as I can see, the key to life is to find what you love and do it with passion, with vitality, right? And that's pretty difficult if you're, maybe not, but you could say it's difficult if you're not given the opportunities as well, so there's two sides to this. It's once again, I've forgotten what the question was, but
so just about what you've, it's helped you to heal, to become more embodied. You mentioned courage.
And you know what? Asking for help. That's the biggest one. And we are not taught to ask for help.
Yeah, definitely not.
Men at Eton. It's like, what, you're asking for help? Yeah, I need it too. I totally need it too. I really did. I did not want to be in the minority. I did not want to go to that school. I just, I suffer like everyone else. There's just as many people who are depressed and, messed up. I mean, if it's so glorious to go to Eton, why are the Etonians in government treating everyone like such shit? It's just like, because they're suffering, because it's a fucked up, system, or maybe we just don't know how lucky we are. Maybe that's the case. Who knows? Maybe it's just our fault. But asking for help has been a huge one. Having the courage to ask for help, therapy, healing, getting healings, learning, being in that, learning, training in healing modalities, spiritual practice, or at least self-development practice, which to me is very important. The body, whether it's dance or yoga. I mean, I preferred dance because yoga, I was, structured movement. Just like I wanted my body to take back the authority of my life, my intuition, my instinct, take back the body intelligence, which when we come down from the mind, when we let go of the mind being in the driving seat, the thinking being in the driving seat, we can't stop the thinking. Nothing wrong with the thinking, it's magical, it's amazing. But if there's only, if we don't come alive in our body, it's like then we recognize, there's a there's a dance that's always happening, and we realize, wow, that's a much deeper perspective, a deeper level of perspective that is fundamentally liberating, actually, and healing, deeply healing. So meditation, dance, embodiment. I mean, Eton is a top heavy boarding school. Academia is a top heavy. We've become so top heavy. We have no idea how top heavy we've become. Just yeah. Oh, that thought's really important. That thought's really, but that thought. This poor body, like in it, it's like we've forgotten what body intelligence even is. It's coming back now, obviously. I'm sure lots of people listening to this podcast are very aware of it. But as a culture on the whole, the mainstream culture, it's like an awareness. There was amazing sports that happened at Eton, but I'm talking about mindful body awareness.
It's interesting. Sorry to interrupt. The idea there of sport. So I love sport, but I've loved dancing because of that spontaneity. I said about the archetypes, the lover, that space just to flow rather than kind of that, which I was good at, but I've loved just more that spontaneity of dropping, what do I feel? And when I've danced, it's like grieving or crying, it's allowing whatever needs to come up. So
when I was at prep school, I was a really, really good footballer. Okay. And but I hit about the age of 12, 13, and up until like about 12, I was like a really good footballer. And I loved it. I absolutely loved it. I was crazy about it. I had all my football albums, my Panini football stickers.
I've still got mine upstairs.
Oh God, I just loved it. And but then when I turned 12 and 13, it's like body weight started to become more important, and physical game, and I stopped making the teams, and then I went to Eton, and I was just, I liked it, but I just wasn't as good, and it was like became a bit frustrating. And then I stopped, then I got interested in girls and other things, and then it wasn't until I discovered dancing, I think when I was 29, 30, and I someone told me about 5 rhythms, and I went to a class, and I was just like, oh my God, it just flooded back, that joy, that same joy that I got from playing football. It was this body, like multi-directional, like I'm not thinking where to go. I'm just allowing my body to forwards, backwards, sideways, up, down, the tribe, like I'm in a tribe, and there's this intuitive kind of dance happening. I know it doesn't look like that a lot of the time in football. I still watch a lot of football, and I love the teams that it does look like a dance, like when Man City are playing well, it's just like a dream. It's a joy to watch. And these people, it's like there's so much vibrancy, body vibrancy there, of coming alive. And then when they score a goal, it's just like, uncensored emotion, and they'll kiss each other. And it's so funny, even in COVID times. And it's just this whole thing, it's for the dance, that's why I just dedicated my life to dance, spirit, movement of spiritual practice, dance of spiritual practice, because it just it heals us. It brings us out of this top heavy, very left brained kind of like existence, where we have to control, and we lose touch with, we think intuition is just some kind of, an instinct is just, that, how can that help us? That just gets us into trouble. This old idea that instinct gets us into trouble, like this kind of, it's all, if we let our instincts run, then it's all just going to be sexual, or I don't know. It's just like absolutely bonkers, actually. When we when we really allow, you know, our instincts to come alive and our intuition to come alive through actual spiritual practice and body practice, it's deeply, deeply healing. So and it also allows, it opens up the cavities of our heart, you know, so we can become vulnerable. You know, we see people after Five Rhythms sessions and workshops, and this is often tears, and you know, there's so much tenderness, and then we can get in touch with our righteous anger, and when dumping it on anyone, we allow anger to become power, you know, and sadness to become release, an essential release that we should be doing all the time in life, you know. And
so just to interrupt there, like Five Rhythms, for those who don't know, is a dance practice that Francis has been doing for many years. To get that, I just had a vision. I'd love you to run a Five Rhythms class in the House of Commons.
What about Eton? Maybe going back to Eton, since I went there, maybe they'll let me back.
Great, yeah. I mean, I've thought about
once or twice about going back to Eton and talking about, you know, I just have memories of people who would come from other places and, you know, for our assembly and talk to us, and we just crucify them, you know. Like, I remember this really serious talk, and someone put their hand up, and some idiot said, "What's the record number of red Smarties that's ever been found in a Smartie box?" or something like that. I was just like, pathetic, sort of, you know, this is you know, yeah, I don't know, you know, maybe I'm sure there's some come of it as well, but I don't think that's my role to try to change these people. You know, my role is to transform myself and my community, and offering my gift to the communities that I engage in, you know, naturally.
Thank you, very inspiring, Francis. Thank you. So any last words? And also, how do people, you know, learn more about what you do? I put the link in the description.
Yeah, I do have a website that's quite in need of updating. Awakened Presence. I do teach Five Rhythms on. Well, I've just started after a year and a half of online classes since the pandemic. I actually stopped a couple of weeks ago, but I am starting again. I'm doing 5 Friday evening Five Rhythm sessions online. 7:30 to 9, and I think they start on the 23rd of May. That'd be right. No, that wouldn't be right, because 23rd is a Sunday. Yeah, I think they start on I imagine they start on the 20th of May, but I'm about to put them up on my website. And yeah, I do. I've got some retreats lined up and planned. My website, obviously, COVID has completely hit the Five Rhythms world.
Of course,
and I haven't been teaching workshops online, but I'm starting to plan again. And so my website is the best way to find out about what the work that I do, Five Rhythms. And you know, prior to COVID, I was also holding non-duality retreats, which is the Advaita Vedanta tradition. I've got a teacher who called Rupert Spira, who I've done, I think, 17 long retreats with over the last few years, really being devoted to the teachings that are coming through him about the nature of consciousness and who we are really, and coming to know ourselves as the presence of awareness rather than getting lost in the phenomena of life. You know, we get so lost in the objects of life, including the thoughts, you know, and we get exhausted, and we forget who we really are. We're not the thoughts, you know. We are what it's all made of, you know. We're what it's all made of. So we go into an experiential contemplation of what is it that's aware of, what is it that is aware of this very experience, you know. What is it that's aware of the objects rather than the object? So we go to the context rather than just the content. Context of life, the context of who we are.
Mm.
That's a whole nother conversation that I love. I do actually have a YouTube channel, but I'm not very regular at making little videos, but keep wanting to, yeah.
Well, if you send me the link, then I'll put it into the description as well, so people
Francis Eliot, Non-Duality, or Francis Eliot, Awakened Presence. But I'll send you the link. Yeah, I've probably got 6 or 7 just 15-minute YouTube videos up. Just sort of guided contemplation meditation that I love doing. You know, that's my real passion, is just peace, you know, just coming to a sense of peace and knowing our unified nature. And knowing what it really means experientially. When we hear all the time, oh, we are one. But what does that, beyond words, what does that really mean? Or we are unified, or you know, my old teacher Gabrielle Roth used to say, there's only one of us here, you know. Yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
So,
well, thank you.
Again, that's on my website. I will be planning some retreats soon, and we've got a new project, me and my partner, down in Glastonbury, as you said at the beginning, and yeah, that's all for later in the summer and next year. But I'll send you some stuff that you can put on the notes.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Francis. It's been a real pleasure. I've learned a lot. Thank you for your stories and your wisdom. So, and for sharing. Yeah. Cool. Well, thank you, Francis.
Yeah. Blessings.